Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in educational settings. Hello, my name is Dr. Shaddai Tembo, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I am a senior lecturer at Bath Spa University and associate lecturer at the Open University and an independent speaker, consultant and writer for critical early years. Now, throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics related to supporting Oracy in primary and early years settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. I am delighted to introduce Michael Gardner as today's guest. Welcome to the podcast, Mike. How are you today?
Hello, I'm really good, thank you, and thank you for inviting me on.
Brilliant. So before we get into this week's conversation, perhaps you could provide an introduction to yourself.
Sure, so I'm Mike Gardner. I'm the founder of the Oracy Shift. We're on a mission to make sure Oracy is at the forefront of what schools do in their teaching and learning and the way that they support our pupils across the country. In my day job, I'm teaching and learning lead for the Maritime Academy Trust. So that's a selection of 13 primary schools across South East London into Kent. In my day job, many roles such as running our CPD pathways, leading on our ECT program, and just doing lots of really great team teaching with teachers at all levels and leaders across our schools from nursery up to year 6.
Brilliant. So far in the series, we've talked about a range of issues related to Oracy in terms of that connection to social mobility, the ways in which teachers can support formative assessment practices, and also those connections to children's identity and their well-being. In this episode, we're going to be touching on those everyday opportunities for Oracy. My question to you, Mike, to begin then is, when we think beyond the classroom, where do you see some of the richest talk happening in schools, and where are those opportunities to embed Oracy across the whole schooling environment for those children?
I think the first one that springs to mind, and this is probably one of my favourite parts of the day, is the drop off and pick up. And this, I loved it when I was in nursery because you really have a real dialogue with the parents there. And it sort of goes as they get older, they come in on their own. But that opportunity for children to see how you interact not only with them, with your greetings and with your, asking them how they are, but also with their parents, to show them and show the parents the value that we place upon them as a person, their interests. So that's a really important part of the day. And when I see teachers that, when the children are coming in, they're in their classroom busily preparing. One of my pieces of advice is go and see go and see your parents, go and speak to them, go and see if there's any concerns, and go and talk to them about what is happening in the classroom. And then the children see how you're interacting and your greetings to the children. It's showing them this is what social interaction is like. So that window of opportunity, it might be short, but it's really valuable. If you go through the day, then thinking about the lunch hall is really important. We always try and teach our children manners in school, but getting children who maybe are, when they're asking for their lunch from the dinner staff, using their manners, modelling to them, reminding, setting that expectation. And also, I've been in schools recently where they've really thought about their table layouts. So rather than having long tables, having sort of square tables where children face each other. Some children don't have this opportunity at home to have that discussion over the dinner table for many different reasons. So modelling to them and showing them that actually it's not just about putting the food in as quickly as you can so you can get outside to play. There's value in that talking to peers and to adults across the table. The playground is a great place for Oracy, and it's where you come away from the routines and structures of the classroom. So things like turn taking, having games where they need to follow instructions or share the rules with each other. Areas for role play. And I'm not talking just early years, I'm talking beyond early years. There's opportunities for children to express themselves in the playground away from just the learning that the teachers put on. The last one I would think about is those extracurricular clubs that we run. there's some great opportunities for talk there. Some maybe are more subtle. So when they're doing sports clubs, are they given an opportunity to talk tactics to their teammates? Do they have to learn some of the key vocabulary for, say, in gymnastics, some of the moves they're doing, and they have to give feedback to each other? And then obviously you may have some more Oracy related clubs, debate clubs, poetry, drama, acting, which can, bring children out of their shell. And children that maybe struggle academically might find a real passion for a sport or a craft or an art form where they can use their language. So I think as a school, you need to look much wider than just what's happening in that classroom and look across the whole day as an opportunity.
Yeah, you raise some really important moments that often occur without any discussion about them, really, in terms of those parent pick up and drop off points, but also those lunchtime opportunities where children can get really into those conversations. At the same time, they can often feel quite rushed, can't they, I think? And sometimes with the strict routines that we have in schools and some earlier settings, it can be difficult for teachers and educators to give children the time to have those conversations. But it can also be difficult for teachers themselves to have those conversations with parents and carers as they're coming in, who themselves are busy, dropping off and coming to and from work or whatever. So I guess there's a reflection or an ask there for perhaps teachers to slow down and think about the value of those moments that we might think are maybe less significant than the actual teaching, but are actually really important in terms of supporting children's Oracy skills.
Definitely. I think one example, a boy who would often struggle coming into school, he loved his football, he was very able, would go to the academies and there's trials every day. But academically he was struggling. And he didn't have the words to say, I'm finding this difficult. He's very competitive. He's driving himself forward with his sports. He didn't have the words, but, we would have that banter and those jokes. And as he'd come in, we'd have a joke about the football and whose club was doing better and how were your football skills. And, for me, I would make sure that if I'm on play duty, I'd go and, join in with the games with them and sort of have a bit of that non-academic talk with them, because that conversation, that dialogue, children don't always get spoken to in that sort of back and forward way. And it's really important for them to recognise that a conversation is a two-way process and it's quite a fun and enjoyable thing as well. And that also then, I think you said about teachers to slow down. Putting in those relationships and that effort pays off dividends in the long term. Those children will do lots for you in the room and they'll engage a lot more with you if they have some sort of shared interest and they know that you value them as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm thinking about that example of pick up and drop off time, particularly with young children who often see and understand a lot more than we teachers sometimes think. So they're always picking up on those subtle interactions between adults and learning from the ways in which we interact, which feeds into the broader culture of our schools, really, doesn't it? So I'm wondering about how we can ensure that effective Oracy skills are embedded throughout the school culture, and how we can make sure that a child who is thriving in one class is not being silent in another class, and how can we ensure that consistent approach to ensure that regardless of content, the child is always having an opportunity to share their voice?
I think culture is really challenging because culture is not something that changes overnight. And we always have to be aware of when schools come and say, we're just going to change everything and do loads of these Oracy strategies and that's it. It doesn't work like that. Culture is about the people, about the belief system. So I think, first of all, look at the school values, and every school across the country will have values, looking at where they actually are alive. So values of things like confidence or empathy, respect, and how were they actually being lived through what we do as a school, and how is language part of that? And then I think I was looking at the CIPD, who are obviously around HR and processes in business, but it reflects in education as well. Is to change culture, you can't just tell people to think and behave differently, but you can change the policies and the structures you have to help that become possible. So it's looking across those core policies that we have in school, the teaching and learning policy, does it have, and I think recently we've spoken about in the Oracy world, Oracy is the fourth R with arithmetic and reading and writing. Is it in there explicitly as a really important part of what we do and, how we teach? Our behaviour policies, do we have really clear expectations of how we positively interact with children and how we need to support children through our language and our modelling of words and questions to help them? And then also setting up those mechanisms for things like pupil voice. At the end of the day, everything is around the child. But if we're putting these Oracy structures in place, but we're not asking for their feedback or how it's going, then we don't really know what the impact is or if they're finding it useful. So having mechanisms, maybe a pupil voice council or pupil voice ambassadors from different year groups, regardless of age, who can feed back to you and say, this is working really well, could we try this? Because I think like you've mentioned before, even our youngest children will have really good insights as to what works and what doesn't. So we need that feedback loop so that we can hear from the children, even the parents, even, and the teachers, obviously, what works for you. So that, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree that certainly policy and having those kind of auditing and evaluation processes in place are so important for understanding where the school culture is at. I wonder if you'd start there, though. I'm wondering about a teacher listening to this podcast now and thinking practically, what can I do tomorrow to make that difference? And then maybe what can I do in a week's time, a month's time, and what would that look like over a duration of time?
So I think if we step back from teacher and look at, some schools have what we would say is an Oracy lead or an Oracy champion or someone who's driving this change across the school. It doesn't necessarily have to be a senior leader. It might be someone in the school. It's looking at, first of all, we're in our school development plan, and this is sort of the action plan of what we're doing as a school for the next few years. Where does Oracy fit into that vision? A lot of schools post-pandemic were looking at, where does reading, behaviour, where does Oracy, where's language in that? And what effort and resource are we putting into that? I think also looking at the CPD for staff. And I know when I started teaching, CPD was very much, you did one session and that was it. Get on with it and do it. And now we're moving to a better model where CPD is spaced out, and it might be a whole year where you're spacing out CPD and you're giving staff opportunities to go and try things out or rehearse things in their own class and come back and reflect and feedback in a sort of staggered approach. So I think it's really important that as a school, you take it slowly. You need the pedagogy and the buy-in. Why is Oracy important for our context and our children? And then I will say the last thing is then have that phased approach to the talk strategies. You can't do everything at once. You're better off doing one or two things really well, getting the children familiar with it, showing it works, and whether that's in one class or, across the school, getting those teachers who can be champions for it, who can go and say, come and see this in my class, or I'll come and do it in your class, and choosing things that work within your context and then building on that. I don't think you can change it all at once, but choosing something that you can master as a school and reflect and refine and get it right for you is the best starting place, because then you can show to staff, maybe ones that are unsure about it or saying, well, we've done this before, this is just, reinventing the wheel. Look at how it is having an impact. And let's see if we can go further from there. So small steps, buy-in is really important. And also thinking about teacher workload, introducing new things on top of current workload is never going to land well. So it's trying to get people to realise, actually, this talk structure is going to release you from doing all of the talking. It passes the ownership onto the children, and it allows you to be the facilitator, the observer. So you're not adding more to it. You're sort of replacing different aspects of the teaching practice.
Yeah, they're really good steps. Thank you for sharing that, Mike. We are just coming to the end of this podcast now, but I'm just mindful of one thing that we haven't spoken about, and that's parents. Many of our listeners will be parents. Obviously, schools have a responsibility to serve as hubs for the community. So where do parents sit within this Oracy shift?
I think It's a really challenging one. It's a really tricky one because you don't want to patronise or tell parents you need to be doing more with your children that you're not. But I think it's really good to share some of the theory behind what is oracy and why is it so important. Why is language and talking to children so important? Not just to make them great talkers, but in terms of academically, in terms of their well-being, their understanding. So, whether it is through bringing parents in and showing them some of the strategies they can do. I know when I was in nursery, those stay in plays were great opportunities to say to parents, you're a captive audience now. Listen to this. Look at some of these strategies. You have to do it in an empathetic way. And, as a parent myself, you have to do it with an understanding of the demands that are on parents these days. But just bringing them along with the journey, don't making them feel like this is a school thing. Actually, this is a collective approach. And if you do this at home and you engage in these conversations, everyone's going to be better off for it. So it's a tricky one. It's about relationships and trust and doing it in the right way for your parents. So it's a tricky one, but parents are very essential to it because that 0 to 3 age range, if we don't have parents on board, that oracy gap is widening before they've even set foot into school.
And I think that's a fantastic place to end this episode. So thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you.
I would like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Mike, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Shaddai Tembo, and Mike Gardner. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources.